for students to own and manage their learning experiences. Well, that has often been put in contrast then to the rise of personal learning environments. And people have described these, this is my personal learning environment, with the kinds of tools that we, or I in this case, use every day. So I may use Google Docs for collaboration. I may share objects with people through Drop.io or Dropbox. I get information from the world from my Google Reader RSS feed. I communicate with chat and Skype and Adyen. I connect to a number of different resources through OpenID. I listen to Last.fm for my music. I communicate with my peers through Facebook and Twitter. I may do presentations with Prezi or SlideShare or Cool Iris. And I do search of academic materials through my Digo network, through CC Search, through Google Scholar, or through Mendeley. These are all the tools that are surrounding me and are often presented as an alternative in some sense to learning environments. But I think we need to think about this very carefully. There's the stuff we do in our personal cloud space, and then there's the institution. And there needs to be some exchange of data across them, but we have to recognize the boundary. And here's where I think there's some people that have got it right that I want to point out to you. Washington State University has been promoting this idea of a harvesting gradebook. And if you're not familiar with it, I encourage you to look at it. The idea is that you harvest from various sources that the students actually work in the material that in fact is the required submission material for a given assignment. So the actual work that the student does may be anywhere, but it is in some sense brought into the learning environment and into the VLE for the purposes of assessment, which is necessary because the institution is the ultimate arbiter of whether or not something has in fact been successfully done. And so in this case, there's another example of it at BYU, where a particular piece of writing done in a third-party software that the institution doesn't support is submitted for work, and what is actually submitted is the URL to it. And when the institutional tool accepts that, it brings that object up to view and surrounds it with the rubric for that assignment so that it can be graded. So you have this personal learning assessment platform where the tools that the students may use for any particular activity are then brought into the VLE for assessment and evaluation. So we have functions here that include the VLE or LMS and other institutional systems. We have the APIs and the web services and such that connect it to the outside world. We have the portal that provides the front-end interface to that the individual users see, and the connection to the essential back-end institutional enterprise systems. And then we have the various access mechanisms and devices that we all use that need to see a common view of these various items. So we have this personal web space, but we have to be very mindful of that boundary, of that access boundary. We may have work that we have done that we submit from our own particular work environment, whatever that may be, to an institutional repository or institutional, in this case, assessment tool. Or we may submit it directly into the LMS. We may, in fact, have that work stored on our personal cloud. One of the emerging things I think we'll be confronting with very shortly is that we will all have personal clouds sitting wherever we happen to choose to put them, either in our house or in a third-party service. And that may be the point by which we submit work into the VLE environment. And then, of course, we have this external world of the applications that we use every day or which we choose to elect as appropriate for the particular learning task that we have. And we may, in fact, submit material from one of those into the required aspects of our virtual learning environment. Last year, one of the most popular roadshows that the JISC did, the Joint Information System Council in the UK, was a panel on, is the VLE dead? And there were people representing the spectrum of, no, it's not, to, yes, it is. That was in September of 2009 when they first started that roadshow. But the key here is that we need to focus on helping students learn with technology rather than from technology. And the VLE, in my view, has an absolutely important and long-standing, continuing place in the enterprise information environment of our campuses. In fact, in my view, the PLN, a personal learning network or personal learning environment, is often presented as the ideal learning environment by people who are already experts, and suggesting instead that somehow or other is also therefore equally appropriate for people who aren't. And my sense is that it's probably not true. So the challenges that we face in looking at the VLE of the future, and which I think we've heard from Blackboard yesterday, today, and I'm sure over the next 24 hours, reflects real awareness of what the issues are and the directions things need to go. It's very clear that the increasing value of the VLE is being transformed from a resource for content and services into a resource for real-time data and academic activity about student behavior. That's clearly one of the most important emerging areas. Finally, we are actually able to, since in the case of Blackboard, the opening up of the database and some of their analytics tools, capture those intermediate interactions that Randy Bass mentioned, I mentioned earlier, was describing as critical in adaptive expertise that often get left on the cutting room floor, so to speak, and learn from them so that we can understand what's going on in a particular task. That we need to find this balance between what's the institutional responsibility and at the same time encouraging students to be proactive in their own learning and the choice of their own tools. And that's that description I was just talking about, where there are things in the cloud that students need to be able to work with, and yet when the actual submission and assessment and institutional certification takes place, it's absolutely essential that that information gets conveyed into the systems that the school manages. But by and large, the school and the VLE isn't the long-term content repository. It is the record of its occurrence, not the actual container of those objects. And finally, it's absolutely critical that we incorporate the social opportunities for learning into what this hybrid future VLE looks like. That's where, in fact, I think we have the greatest opportunity to leverage the social potential that students and academics bring to make what learning is in the rich context of tertiary education. These are I think, the three key things that you should be thinking about as you consider how to enable, either by policy or by institutional practice and development, acquisition of tools of the Blackboard building blocks, of the outside larger community of Blackboard developers from Ocelot, or anywhere else that may be from within your community or outside. And I think at the end of the day, it's when we get this kind of social engagement around that balance that we'll find a learning environment that not only is relevant for place-based institutions, but bridges those place-based institutions to the larger virtual worlds. I just want to end by giving you the list of sources that were important in my remix of this presentation. And that includes JSB and the Horizon folks, the TED folks, Sapo campus, if you haven't been paying attention to what they're doing in Portugal. I think that's an important place to look. The Harvesting Great book, the work that Dave Wiley and John Mott have been doing, and Casey's work on really commentating about the direction of enterprise tools. And I actually got through without the voice entirely dying. Remarkable. Thank you for your attention, and I apologize for the croaky presentation that I was able to give.
Thank you very much, Phil, for this inspiring presentation. So we definitely gave you some food for thoughts, the way emerging technologies can influence in the near future the whole teaching and learning process in your organizations. So take it with you at home and start discussing with your peers what this is going to mean for you. We have still time, so I'm happy to open the floor if you have questions to Phil. So please take the opportunity to ask, to fire your questions.
I just went for 45 minutes with this voice. You can do 2 with yours.
I was really interested in your slide where you showed all of the things you connected with in a day, your Google, your Facebook,
Right.
all of that around you. Do you ever walk down the corridor and talk to someone?
I have actually, and this is very funny, you know that there is a particular iPhone app that allows you to tweet through your camera interface so that you don't run into a stop sign? No, of course. One of the issues I think that we're seeing emerge in a couple of directions. One is the research on multitasking, is the importance of taking time away from this flow of information coming at us, finding the eddies in it so that you can process it. There's been really good data coming out of both Stanford, Johns Hopkins, and a few other places looking at, for example, students doing multitasking, measuring their actual performance on particular tasks. And the students' response when they're interviewed about it is that they feel they're more efficient and better at those tasks by virtue of the way they're handling these different things. The actual outcomes of the tasks show that they're significantly worse. To some extent, it's reminiscent of our earlier understanding when we started to figure out what sleep was for. That sleep is a process by which we consolidate the information we've had during the day and embed it into social cognitive constructs at night through REM activity and stuff like that. And I think the same thing is going on now, but we have to be now proactively and intentionally focused on it so that we build in times when there aren't the onslaughts of technology and information, and we have time to think and concentrate and be narrative. So it's a good question. Yes?
Do you think anybody could be able to own the integration components? Because I see what a lot of what's actually happening is in parts of our institution is that staff like to be able to gravitate outside of the virtual learning environment, and they want to incorporate more of the social networking tools and so forth. Will integration be key to that?
There's clearly a response among some to try to extend outward the VLE to incorporate the widely divergent and rapidly changing mix of Web 2.0 tools. And I think those that make that a significant commitment are doomed to real trouble, in my personal opinion. I think that there will be a set of those Web 2.0 tools that will stand out as being consistently necessary and useful. For example, wikis. I think it's pretty clear that those things need to be a part of the core set. And the question is, do they need to reside in the VLE or not? And the answer, I think, is that not necessarily. If they build the right API environment properly, and I think the opening up that we heard this morning from Clausen in the Blackboard introductory talk is a very encouraging indicator that there is that sort of thinking. There's no point and no need to incorporate every VLE in the planet into the Web 2.0 tool on the planet, into the VLE. In fact, my sense is that if you think about the long tail, out at the far edges of that long tail is where there's hundreds of different Web 2.0 tools that meet the needs of some community, but usually a small community. And then there's only a handful of things at the close end of the tail that are really critical and necessary, and those need to be inside the tent.